let's jump way back to 1776. It was a time of revolution, right? But another revolution was happening on paper, in a book that would basically invent modern economics. We're talking about Adam Smith and his quest to answer the biggest question of all. How do countries actually get rich?
So yeah, what's the magic formula? What makes one country prosperous and another not so much? That's the exact question that kept Adam Smith up at night, and it's what led him to write his masterpiece, The Wealth of Nations. So we're going to unpack his answer and see just how he thought economic growth really worked. All right, so where do you even begin? What's the spark that gets the whole economic engine going? Well, for Smith, it wasn't some grand government plan. He believed it all came down to a few basic ideas about natural order. This belief that economies, if you just leave them alone, will sort of find their own way to success.
And this leads us to his most famous and maybe most powerful concept, the invisible hand. Now, this idea is deceptively simple but absolutely profound. Smith said that when you, me, and everyone else just try to do what's best for ourselves, make a profit, find a good deal, we accidentally end up helping out everyone else, as if some invisible force is guiding us to do good for society.
He put it perfectly with this famous quote. Think about it. The baker doesn't bake bread because he's a great guy who wants you to be happy. He bakes bread to make a living, to feed his own family. It's his self-interest that puts food on your table. And that self-interest, multiplied across millions of people, is what makes the whole market work. Okay, so if self-interest is the fuel, what's the first real gear in this growth machine? For Smith, it was crystal clear. The division of labor. You might know it as specialization. This one idea is the absolute bedrock of his entire theory on how nations get wealthy. And Smith broke down exactly why it's so powerful. First, when a worker does one single task over and over, they just get really, really good at it. Their skill, or dexterity, shoots up. Second, you save a ton of time that's usually wasted switching from one job to another. And third, and this is a big one, when you're laser-focused on one tiny step, you're more likely to figure out a clever way to make it easier or faster, maybe even invent a machine to do it.
But here's the catch. You can't just have specialization pop up out of nowhere. It needs fuel. And that fuel, in Smith's world, is capital accumulation. I mean, think about it. Before you can have a factory with specialized workers, somebody, somewhere, needs to have saved up enough money, enough capital, to buy the tools, build the factory, and pay the workers' wages. So, who's doing all this saving? This is where Smith's view gets a little grim. He figured it could only be the capitalists and landlords, because they're the ones earning profits and rent. The average worker? Nope. He believed they were stuck in something called the iron law of wages. The idea was, if you paid workers more, they'd just have more kids, the population would boom, and you'd have so many people looking for jobs that wages would get driven right back down to the bare minimum needed to survive. No extra cash, no savings.
So we've got a system humming along, right? It's driven by self-interest, fueled by capital, and sped up by specialization. But Smith was no starry-eyed optimist. He didn't think the party could last forever. He saw every economy as having a life cycle, kind of like a person. It has a vibrant youth, but eventually it gets old and slows down. Now, the journey starts in what he called the progressive state, and he described this phase in really glowing terms as a cheerful and hearty time for pretty much everyone. This is the boom time. The economy is growing like a healthy tree, wealth is on the rise, there are opportunities everywhere, and life is good. This chart basically shows you that life cycle. That upward curve is the good times, the progressive state, where the rate of growth is just taking off. But look what happens. It can't go up forever. Eventually it peaks, and then it flatlines. That flat part at the top, that's the end of the road. The economy has hit its limit.
Yep, that incredible climb just doesn't last. Inevitably, things start to change. Competition gets fierce, profits start to shrink, resources get used up, and the whole economy grinds to a halt. It enters what Smith called the stationary state. Progress just stops.
Just look at the difference side by side. The progressive state is all about a cheerful society, rising wages, and big profits being plowed back into more investment. The stationary state, on the other hand, is, well, it's dull. Society stagnates. Wages drop back down to just enough to get by, and profits are so low nobody bothers to invest anymore. The party is officially over. So, this all raises a pretty big question. Was Adam Smith right? I mean, his theory is elegant, but is it perfect? Not by a long shot. A lot of his predictions just didn't pan out.
So let's switch gears and put his ideas under the microscope to see where the theory starts to fall apart.
This table lays out some of the big misses. For one, he saw society as this simple two-class system, capitalists and workers. He totally missed the rise of a massive middle class, which is, a huge engine of modern economies. He also thought only the rich could save, but today, savings come from everyone. But maybe the biggest blind spot was the entrepreneur. Smith was focused on producers and farmers, but he didn't really have a category for the game-changing innovator, the person who drives the economy forward with brand new ideas.
So that brings us to the big, final question. Can we take these ideas from, 250 years ago and apply them to developing nations today? Honestly, it's a tough fit. A lot of developing countries have really small markets, and people just don't have the extra income to save, which means there's no money for investment. Plus, their governments are usually heavily involved, which is the complete opposite of Smith's hands-off ideal. And on top of all that, they're often stuck in what's called a vicious circle of poverty, where low income means low savings, which means low investment, which just leads right back to low income. It's a tough cycle to break.
But, and this is a huge but, just because the whole model doesn't fit perfectly doesn't mean we should toss it out. Even with all its flaws, some of Adam Smith's core insights are just as powerful and relevant today as they were back then.
So what are the big takeaways that have stood the test of time? First, you absolutely need savings to create capital. That's non-negotiable. Second, technology and specialization are massive drivers of productivity. Third, you've got to grow your markets. And finally, this idea of balanced growth, that you can't just focus on one thing. Agriculture, industry, and trade all have to grow together. These are still cornerstone ideas in economics today.
And we'll end on this powerful quote from Smith. Every prodigal appears to be a public enemy, and every frugal man a public benefactor. I mean, wow. What he's saying is that when you spend recklessly, you're hurting everyone. But when you save, when you're frugal, you're actually doing a service to your country. It's not just about your personal finances, it's about building the nation's wealth. A foundational idea that really we're still wrestling with today.